Hi. Okay, this is part 2 of the option production contract. I wanted to go into this with greater detail. This is the most fundamental piece of the puzzle here. This is the piece that gives you the rights to the play from the author. And this is what you will be assigning to the limited liability company for the investors. So this is the basis for your investment. It's the most important piece. So, and let me just say that this is a piece that requires negotiation with the author's agent. That is something I do on behalf of my clients. I will include up to 2 hours of negotiation with the agent, and that should be more than enough to cover the deal. But let's go through the points in the deal. Now it's about a 15-page contract, and it covers not only what you're going to do to develop the play in a festival or developmental production, showcase, 99-seat theater, regional theater, but what the eventual commercial production will be like. Because that's really your goal. So everything is designed to get to the commercial production, Broadway, off-Broadway, but gives you the ability to take the steps along the way. So this contract sets forth what the author is in fact granting to you, what rights he's granting to you. The right to produce the play on the stage, not movie rights, not television rights, the right to produce it on the stage. And it's going to cover certain things like the representation and warranties, that this is in fact an original play with him. It's going to cover the time period. How long do you have to produce the play before it terminates? Do you have to produce it in a year, get it started within a year? Do you have to hit certain benchmarks? Maybe if you have a festival production in a certain amount of time, or a developmental production, or an enhanced regional production, buys you a little more time. All of that is built into the contract. Generally, you have a year with the right to extend it for another year, maybe a little more if you have a theater in place or a star in place. And I'm talking about that extension to get to the commercial production that the investors are going to invest in. Nevertheless, and I just want to repeat this because it bears repeating, that whether you get to that point or not, you need to get this deal, these rights, now, before you start the developmental production, before you do a showcase, before you take it to a festival, because if it catches on, the deal is going to be much different later. So, it describes the grant of rights, it describes the production date, it describes the advances. Now, most of the time what you're going to pay the author is an advance against royalties. The royalty for a straight play, typically off-Broadway, is 5%. For a musical is 6%, which is divided a third to the book writer, a third to the composer, and a third to the lyricist. Those advances can be $100, $1, could be $50,000, depending on the nature of the production and who the author is. In our case, most of these things that are going to be in a developmental stage are probably going to be on the lower end of the spectrum. That's okay. The royalties we spoke about. Let's talk about what happens after you've produced the play in a commercial production. You have other territories to go to. You want to do the play in London, on tour, in Canada, in the English-speaking countries of the world. And there are going to be productions that you don't want to produce, or that you don't produce, that you still share in by virtue of the fact that you produced the play and made it more valuable by virtue of your production. So, those rights that you're not producing are called subsidiary rights. After you're finished with the play, the author, now that it was such a big hit in New York or in London, there's movie interest in it. Well, the author's going to get paid for the movie rights. You're going to share in a percentage of that. And that needs to be spelled out in the contract. Now, typically, if you just did a festival production, maybe you'd get 4%, 6%, all negotiable. If you do it in another production, an enhanced regional production, maybe you get a little more. If you do it in a commercial production, off-Broadway or on-Broadway, you're going to get as much as 40% of the author's royalty, of the author's take for the movie, for the television show, for the game, for all of those things that come out of it. Whether the play is recorded on a CD or a DVD or on internet, all of that is included and is all negotiable. Typically, if you did the play in a commercial production in New York, it depends on how many performances you do. It would go up from 10%, usually at 21 public performances, to 30%, to 40%, and max out at 40% of the author's share. That's very important right, and something that will last, depending on the negotiation, for 10 years from the opening of the play, 10 years from the closing of the play, forever. That's all negotiable. So this is the agreement that gives you all of those rights. There's lots of legalese in it, and there's lots of other things in it, actually, now that I want to mention it. The author has approval over the cast, approval over the director, approval over the replacements. And you want to make sure that there's a mechanism for that approval, that he doesn't not respond to you. It needs to have other things in here regarding exploiting the play for television commercials, on radio, etc. The author's going to want house seats and complimentary seats. So basically this covers the author's agreement. If it's a musical, there'll be a provision for the cast album as well, because you as the producer are supplying the cast album. If you take the author out of town, you're going to have to pay him a per diem. So that's it, covered by New York law, an arbitration clause in case there's a dispute. That's pretty much the option and production contract. Let's come back and discuss the full limited liability company and raising money from investors.